Pretty face.
No, sometimes I've had these flashes. No,
Right. Cheers.
Get a free drink. So, right, and if it needs a bit of something else, you know, a little bit more one or the other, you can let me know. That's all. Yeah. Well,
Off you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
That must be alive. Well, cheers.
Cheers. This is a newspaper from 1971.
good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. As chairman of the Hall Management Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to our evening of Brinkley's Recollections. We're very fortunate that Dinah Kavanagh and Dick Turner have agreed to share some of their memories with us. And it is marvellous to see such a lovely turnout, so you're obviously all very interested in your own village, and that's good. Dinah Kavanagh has been resident of Brinkley all her life, was born here. Her father, Reginald Brown, followed his father as managing director of Brinkley Commercial Stores, which at the time had branches in Great Bradley and Dullingham, selling a wide range of goods, from groceries through clothes to china and furniture. And, you know, isn't it sad that we don't have that sort of facility here now?
Yes.
And, you know, absolutely marvellous the support that we've got here this evening for a village event. It's absolutely fantastic. Dinah is going to speak to us for a few minutes, and then Dick Turner is going to follow on, and I shall introduce him when it's his turn. We will then have a short break for people to refill their glasses if they would like to. I'm afraid this time it will cost. And then after that, they've both agreed to take questions. So I think we're in for a very interesting evening. And Dinah Kavanagh.
I think this is worse than Mastermind. Well, you've had a bit of an introduction about the shop. I thought I'd just say a few words because I was a little bit involved. There was a shop in the village in the 1790s, quite small. But when my grandfather, Montague Brown, came to live in the village as a young married man with a child, the shop was a departmental store with branches and all sorts of things. It was really quite extensive. I just wonder whether most people would know where the shop was, because there's not much to tell you now, is there? So we'll start with the shop house, which is next door to the church. In other words, if you go up the church drive, it's the house on the left called the Gables. And that was the shop house. Next door, the building was the front entrance to the shop. And then there are two houses, the Hollies and Vine Cottage. And you go in the back way and there's a courtyard with warehouses on two sides, 2 stories high. And the last side was the stable block, where the horses that pulled the covered wagons were kept. there was also a 4-acre field by allotments where the horses could be turned out on a summer evening or weekends. Now, sadly, I don't remember the covered wagons or the horses because I came upon the scene too late. Sorry, I've got dry mouth. But an older brother and sister remember. And my sister Pamela remembers going to the school at Brinkley. And one afternoon, there was torrential rain. And a lot of children walked miles to school. Some lived halfway to 6 Mile Bottom. They lived in farm cottages. And my grandfather very kindly sent the covered wagon and Black Bess, who was a favourite horse, and two members of staff to collect all the children and take them home, which I thought was a nice story. Excuse me, my mouth is so dry.
Would you like some water?
Lemonade do?
Oh, that would be great, thank you.
Here you go.
Right. Now, I thought it would be nice if you had a little trip round Brinkley Shop. And I'll try and tap this, and you can use your lovely imaginations. So we'll go up the front drive, straight into the grocery department. And the first thing you'd notice was a beautiful mahogany counter going right down the centre. And on the top, 3 sets of scales and weights. I think it's hard to imagine a time when there was very little packaging, that we had tins around, but most things had to be wrapped in some way, poured, scooped, tied up, and so you needed lots of bodies behind the counter, lots of pairs of hands, very time consuming. And I can remember sacks of different kinds of rice and semolina and tapioca and all the rest of the stuff with scoops to pour into whatever packaging you had. Behind the counter were innumerable drawers of luscious things like apricots and prunes and currants and then those halves of candied peel with sugar in. And so when you went into the shop, your nostrils were assaulted by wonderful scents. Sometimes there'd be grinding coffee beans, and that's a powerful aroma. That really is lovely when you get into that. Now, the coolest place in the establishment was the cellar, where there were boxes of butter and margarine and lard. So they all came up when the time was needed and were put on the side. But wooden boxes that had to be opened up, again, something to be cut and wrapped, which means more hands to do that. Cheeses were kept in a round cheese house in one of the ground floor warehouses. And I remember this one was made of perforated zinc, so the little mice couldn't get in to get at the cheese. So they would be brought and put on the side and cut up, as you would imagine, with the two handles and the wire. I think they still do that in some grocery shops now. But I thought that was a very skillful occupation, to be able to cut that in any kind of measurement that was near to what you wanted. I thought that was very clever of them. Now, my grandfather used to go to London every so often to select cheeses which would come by rail and be brought up from the station. And he would go off early in the morning, be taken by pony and trap to the station, And he'd wear his top hat and his long coat and take his walking stick and go off to the city for the day. And one day, when he and I were walking in the Gables garden, he was feeling expansive, and he was waving his walking stick about. And he was saying, "I've got a secret in here. If anybody attacked me in a big city, I'd give a good account of myself." And I was just stupefied, couldn't understand what he was talking about. And then he looked at me and said, "How old are you now?" I said, "I'm 6. He said, "I think you could see what's in here now. But keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself." So he gave a kind of twist, and then that, and again, and he drew out a very sharp sword, which took my breath away. And it was a sword stick that he took to London because he felt it would offer him a bit of protection. And I couldn't imagine my affable, friendly grandfather, because he was always smiling and always nice, I couldn't imagine him hurting anybody with a sharp sword. And when it came to my grandmother, Laura, who was always dressed in black bombazine and had a stern countenance and ruled the household like a martinet, I could see her doing anything with a sword. but not my grandfather, because he really was a lovely man and very affectionate. So I've got to get back to the shop now, haven't I? Because I've gone out up to London.
You got to the cheese.
I've got to the cheese, thank you. That's lovely, I need reminding. After that lovely gin and tonic somebody had. On a Friday, there was excitement in the shop because the pigs came in. Pigs came into the pork place at the back, and a local butcher came in, and some more staff, and they dismantled the pigs. And they made bacon, and they made lovely sausages. My father said they had lots of nutmeg in, but I think they were super sausages. Excellent. And in the shop house, Grandmother Laura, she could make home-cured ham. She couldn't do a lot of things, but she could do that. And she had 2 maids that lived in, so she had lots of assistants. And she would have something like 4 or 5 whole hams of pork. And they got marinated in deep trays. And they used the local strong beer, because it was strong in those days. Strong beer and saltpetre and lots of spices. And these hams were tossed and turned for about 2 days in this wonderful marinade. And then they were wrapped with layer after layer of brown paper, tied up with string, like a parcel. And then they were hung on the hooks on the beams in the old kitchen. And the kitchen was very warm because one side was an old range and there were 2 ovens and the fire was always going. So that was hot and dry up there. So after quite a while, those hams were ready and my father would be given one. And they would have home-cured ham suppers. And that was wonderful. This sliced ham, we used to have a little mustard and a little vinegar, crusty bread. And I have never tasted ham like that since. I think you'd have to go to Italy. Franca would tell me. I bet you have it there.
We do.
Yes. So that was wonderful. Lovely memory for me. Anyway, back to where we got to before. We've been out and about, haven't we? So we're back. Wines and spirits. I think the wine could be sold in jugs or bottles, and certainly spirits. And then up the stairs to the drapery, another long counter. Bales and bales of material for women's clothes, I can remember. I don't know whether there was suiting there. There were lots and lots of winter and summer cloths, which were made up by local dressmakers, unless you were clever enough to make them up yourself. bales of sheeting because people hemmed their own sheets and pillowcases. I can picture piles of corduroy trousers for working men, very sombre colours, you know, browns and blacks and dark greys, hard wearing. That's what they really had, mostly. The haberdashery cupboard, that was fascinating. It was full of boxes of feathers of all colours, including ostrich feathers, to decorate ladies' hats, covered buttons, ribbons, lace. And for me, an exciting thing, because at the end of the cupboard was another door which was kept locked. And one day I asked my grandfather, I said, "What's in there?" And he said, "Come with me." And he led me through, unlocked the door, and we ended up in the shop house on the landing, because we were one floor up. That was the house, the shop house next door. And a huge safe covered with an antimacassar, which my grandfather, whose office was at the bottom of the stairs to the drapery, could pop up there, go through, and deposit money or bring some out, having removed the antimacassar. Does everybody know what an antimacassar is?
No.
Well, their gentlemen years ago used to use something called macassar oil to colour their hair and then stick it down so it was a bit more sedate. And that macassar oil that went on their head was a terrible staining agency. So all the furniture covers would be covered with this stain unless the woman of the house made what they called as an antimacassar, which was a large cotton, either knitted or crocheted, and that went over the backs of the chair backs and covers. But you couldn't win being a woman. I mean, that got stained, antimacassars got stained, but at least you could take them off and put them in, you know, and wash them. So it wasn't as bad as the actual furniture. So there we are, back from that, and ever onward. Boots and shoes was the next place. And then china and earthenware, I can remember. And then a room that was beautifully lined with wood. The ceiling was lined, there were skylights. The walls were lined with wood, although there were windows. And everything wrapped. And I should think every kind of size of nail and screw and nut and bolt and everything else. And garden tools. And I think the idea of the wood was probably to stop the rust getting in, I imagine. In the oil house at the back in the courtyard, they sold oil for heaters and oil lamps. There were bins of maize in one of the warehouses. And as a child, when my brother and two sisters went to school, and if I could sneak round, I was about 3, I think, sneak round the back, and if there was a lid of one of the bins of maize open, I could play with there were pewter measuring jugs, and I could tip the contents from one to the other and get my hands in there. Lots of people had chickens, and they went gleaning, the women went gleaning. They got a lot of grain that way, but they topped up with the maize. And to me that was lovely to play with. I always got chased away. Someone would say, "Your mother would wonder where you are, get back." So I'd get chased back. When my father was growing up in the shop house, he remembers they had a succession of young business apprentices that came to live. They came 4 at a time, and they probably stayed about 6 months. And they slept in the big attic room at the top of the gables. 4 young men, the grandparents of 3 children, and 2 maids. So that was a very busy, bustling household at the time. Now, what else can I tell you? When my father came back from the First World War, he found that some of the shop staff, some of the young men, were going round to a third public house that nobody would know about, except, I should think, Christina and David, because their cottage is White Hart Cottage. And this, I don't remember this part, but my father said these young men were coming, because it's right next door to the